So in 1917, America voted to join the war and assembled a massive expeditionary force to go over there to Europe. Over There was the name of a very popular George Cohan musical and song. Now, the reason we joined the war, of course, was the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare by the Germans, and that warfare heavily damaged Allied shipping. From February of 1917 to July of 1917, just 5 months, the Germans sank almost one-third of the British merchant fleet. 1 in 4 ships that left Britain during those months did not come back. American intervention ended British vulnerability in a very dramatic fashion. Merchant shipping was organized into convoys, as you see here. This is an actual picture from 1917, with armed escorts. Destroyers with depth charges were the armed escort. They were particularly effective because destroyers, smaller than battleships, had a very shallow draft. You see here a drawing of the HMS Java, a British destroyer. And so U-boats can't fire a torpedo at an angle. They have to fire at a horizontal line. So to hit a ship with such a shallow draft, they'd practically have to surface, making them vulnerable to the destroyer's weapons. Sonar was also developed at this time and was used to detect submarines. So by the end of 1917, Allied shipping losses declined by 2/3, and the increased flow of stuff from America to the Allies stiffened. French and British resolved and returned their advantage. Now, for the bulk of the war, the two primary powers faced each other on the Western Front, a line of fortifications running from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps that never really changed much. And the French and British exhausted themselves in offensives in 1916 and 1917, trying to break that line. But the Germans held and focused on the east. In early 1918, they shifted their forces, the remainder of their forces, west to attack the weakened Allies. They were able to do this because a second revolution occurred in Russia in November 1917. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and the Bolsheviks replaced Kerensky. Kerensky had tried to keep Russia in the war, but the war was very unpopular, and so Lenin partially won his victory by promising to end the war, and he did so by signing something called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with the Germans. It was disastrous for the Allies. He gave away a third of European Russia. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, they were all given to the Central Powers. Of course, when Germany was defeated, they would be made independent, at least for a while. This disastrous treaty was made worse by Lenin's publication of secret Allied treaties that showed that France and Britain, like Germany, hoped to use the war to expand their empires. It was not just about German aggression. This was embarrassing to the Allies and to Wilson also. Wilson moved to restore Allied credibility by his concrete program for peace, a very idealistic thing called the 14 Points. More about that later. Now, with the Allies weakened by their offensives and the Germans strengthened by fresh forces moved from the east where they didn't have to worry anymore about Russia, in March and April, the Germans unleashed a devastating offensive. And on May 27th, advanced 10 miles in one day. This is astounding given that for years, you'd fight for, you'd lose tens of thousands of men and fight for weeks to gain a few hundred yards. This offensive reached the Marne River, which was actually very close to Paris, right here, and the French prepared to evacuate Paris. Now, it was at this moment that a fresh, well-equipped American army arrived to reinforce the French and British lines. The AEF, the American Expeditionary Force, under General John Pershing. He had led the building and training of this army. Before the war, the U.S. had only the 17th largest army in the world, but we built this massive force, and U.S. troops fought well, ending the offensive that had been Germany's last best hope. Paris was saved. The Allies then staged their own offensive in September 1918. It successfully reached the German border. Importantly, it did not invade Germany, but it reached the border, clearly was victorious, and the Germans at that point asked for an armistice, a ceasefire, based on the terms of Wilson's 14 points. This was November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day, which later morphed into Veterans Day.